Life and Career, a wonderful book by Dr. Subbarao, and Dr. Subbarao would be in conversation with Suchitra Shenoy, and while they take their respective seats on the stage, let me quickly read out Suchitra Shenoy's bio. Suchitra Shenoy is a non-fiction writer. Her publications include Mindful Parenting 2016 and the co-authored Infinite Vision 2011 on the Arabic eye care system. Both books made Amazon's top lists, and Infinite Vision was a finalist for the George Terry Award in the US and translated into Japanese, Portuguese and Tamil. Her third book is forthcoming, and she holds degrees from Brandeis University and London School of Economics. She also teaches in the Buddhist tradition. And in conversation with Dr. Subbarao is Suchitra Shenoy, and I hand over the session to Suchitra. Sir, thank you very much for coming to HLF and being a part of HLF. Thank you so much. Over to you, Suchitra. Usual kind of a statutory warning, 40 minutes into the session and 10 minutes for Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, thank you all for coming. I think one of the lovely things about HLF is no matter how big it gets, it's still like a community town hall where you have so many familiar faces, so many new faces, but it's all really enjoyable. So very quick introduction to Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao. He grew up in Andhra Pradesh, decades in the IIS, and we'll hear some stories from there. Then he was Finance Minister for the Government of India, Finance Secretary, Finance Secretary, Government of India, 2007-2008, after which he was the Governor at the Reserve Bank of India from 2008 all the way till 2013. After that, he's been a visiting fellow at some of the top universities in the world, the NUS, UPenn, and now more recently at Yale University, where he spends the fall term. In 2016, he published his book, Who Moved My Interest Rate? And that was about his time at the RBI. And now his book, Just a Mercenary, is out. It's available for sale, and it's very readable. So, before we start, Dr. Subbarao, and before we go into the contents of the book, I want to start with the cover. So I'd sent this poster around, and a friend of mine who has no connection with economics or finance looked at it, looked at the title, and she said, "Who is the business tycoon you're interviewing?" So just want to know why Just a Mercenary?
Thank you very much. It's wonderful being here, Suchitra. Thank you for that question. The title of the book is Just a Mercenary. I considered a few other titles and decided on this one. The reason is the following. The way I understand a mercenary is someone who goes to fight a war. He has no larger commitment to any larger goal. For example, today there is this Russia-Ukraine war. Reportedly, there are third country soldiers fighting. They're fighting for Russia because Russia is paying them. Tomorrow, if Ukraine pays more for them, they'll switch. They don't care who wins the war, they're just mercenaries. They're doing their best, of course. Given that definition of my understanding of what a mercenary is, why that title? No, we are all prone to complaining about our country, how this country is unfair, unjust, unequal. I do that too. But when I honestly look back on my life and career, I find that this country has given me so much. I went to a science school with a government scholarship. I got an IIT education again with a scholarship. I got to serve in the IAS. I got appointed as the governor of the Reserve Bank, all because there is some room for merit. But the question that rankles in my mind, whatever assignment I had, I tried to do my best. But the question that still rankles in my mind is, did I do my best just because I'm being paid for it? or was I driven by a larger cause? Have I given back to society for all that I've received? That's the question that works in my mind even today, and that's the question that I posed as the title of the book.
Thank you. So now your book covers from when you were young all the way through RBI and beyond. But I was thinking maybe we can actually tackle it the other way around. So the last chapter of the book, for all of you who are going to read it, is a very moving letter that Dr. Subbarao writes to his mother. And in that, you write telling her how much you miss her, what you've been doing in life since then. And I was deeply touched by it. In it, he also has kind of summary leadership lessons. Among those, you choose a very interesting episode in your career, the Arak bottling plant episode, when NTR was chief minister. And you talk about that both as it's also personal challenging and very funny. So I actually just wanted to read out.
Please go ahead. Yeah. Your voice is more sonorous. Go ahead.
So there's a really great part in the book where NTR has decided that the government is going to have prohibition and the government is going to set up Arak bottling plants. So Dr. Subbarao is ushered into NTR's inner sanctum as early as 6 a.m. because he was known to have meetings that started really early and he would wrap up his day by 4 p.m. So as soon as he saw me, NTR unleashed a charm offensive. Brother, as you know, we have a sacred responsibility to protect our people from falling prey to the unscrupulous bootleggers who sell adulterated liquor. And then he goes on to make his case. And Dr. Subbarao writes, he said this in dramatized Telugu, deploying his extraordinary acting skills, using facial expressions, hand gestures, and a lot of voice intonation to show his abhorrence for drinking, his contempt for the unscrupulous bootleggers, and how he had full confidence in Dr. Subbarao's ability to implement this very difficult program. And he also added in good measure, brother, do come and see us without hesitation if you have any problem. So I'd like to ask you, what are the life lessons, from this? How is it a challenge? How is it also something that you look back on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I served in the IAS for 35 years. And one of my assignments was, of course, an officer on special duty for Arak bottling. In real time, it wasn't so great or glamorous, but when I look back on it 35 years later, I must say that it is one of the most significant assignments of my IAS career. Let me give you some background because many people here are not old enough to have lived through NTR's period. NTR was the chief minister here during the mid-80s for the first time. And he was a teetotaler. Not only was he a teetotaler, but he had contempt for people who drank. So he was paid by the thousands of people who died because of drinking adulterated liquor. And he wanted to impose complete prohibition. But the finance department people at that time, they pushed back and saying, you cannot do prohibition because excise revenue is a huge lot of money. And if we lose that, we can't implement any of your scheme. They scared NTR away. So NTR said, okay, if I cannot impose total prohibition, I'll do the second best thing, which is to bottle liquor and sell only bottled liquor, which is a government stamp. That happened, in some senior officers meeting in NTR, and they decided that NTR was a very impulsive person. As soon as he decided that, he said this must be implemented within the next 7 months. And then they decided, Chief Secretary suggested some names, and they decided to post me as officer on special duty for Arak bottling. Now, imagine if somebody tells you I'm officer on special duty for Arak bottling. My first reaction was, why me? There are 250 IAS officers in the state. I have not shown any flair for bottling any liquor, no project management. Why did they choose me? And if you go to a family function or a marriage or party or whatever, people ask you, what are you doing now? I'm bottling liquor. You see these IAS toppers every year, they're interviewed in the newspapers. Where do you want to join the IAS? I want to join the IAS and change the world. Okay? Am I changing the world by bottling liquor? So that was my lot. It was a no end job because there was no way it could be done in 7 months. I was distraught, angry, frustrated. You don't know who to be angry with. So I went home and brooded for about 4 or 5 days, even as the clock was ticking. Then after that I said, okay, if I have to do this, I will do it. It's better to do and fail rather than not do and fail. So I gathered together some people and we worked night and day. In about 7 months, 3 days before the D-Day, we had 23 Arab bottling plants in each of the 23 districts of Andhra Pradesh at that time. Fully equipped, fully staffed, everything in place 3 days before. When I look back on that, some of the lessons that I learned, first thing was don't be vain. I thought I was destined for bigger things. Arab bottling was for other IAS officers, not for me. Don't be vain. The second lesson I learned was that don't fear failure. Okay? So there's nobody who succeeds in everything they do. So don't fear failure, because failure can teach you some of the best lessons of your life. And the most important lesson I learned is, contrary to what you learn in management schools or in leadership seminars, what do they tell you? They tell you that the secret to success in life is to discover your passion and pursue it. I found that my experience does not accord with it. The secret to success in life, according to me, is not to discover your passion and pursue it, because life does not always give you the opportunity to pursue your passion. The secret to success in life is to do whatever you are enjoying to do it with passion. That's the lesson I learned.
And it's a really different lesson than what most young people get to hear these days, which is what you said, follow your passion. But
I don't know what young people get today, I'm too old for that.
Yeah. I'd like to speak a little bit and hear from you about Dr. Manmohan Singh. He passed away recently. And in the many obituaries that were written about Dr. Singh, I came across this beautiful anecdote where Dr. Singh is being interviewed by the UK's Financial Times. And in that, the journalist is kind of really pushing a point or belaboring a point. And Dr. Manmohan Singh apparently said in his calm, really dignified and gentle way, he said, Martin, I understand the economics, but if you make a mistake in your column, you can go change your column tomorrow and correct your mistake. If I make a mistake, millions of people's lives get affected. So moving. So I was wondering, did you feel like that when you were governor of RBI, that you had this vast nation? And secondly, and we'd love to hear more on this, can you share some of your encounters with Dr. Singh, your memories, influence?
Yeah. Actually, I combined my response to both your questions. I had worked with Dr. Manmohan Singh as Finance Secretary in Delhi. I interacted with him in several meetings, several discussions. He knew me. In fact, I was in the Ministry of Finance even during the 1991 reform. That was much earlier, but much later in my career, I was in Delhi, and then I was appointed Governor of the Reserve Bank in September 2008. And I went to call on the Prime Minister to thank him for the confidence he reposed in me. So I went to his office in South Block. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. Just he and me. A very brief meeting, just about 15 minutes. So I told him, thank you, sir, for appointing me, and he said very nice things about me, which was very pleasing. Then we talked about the economic issues, the Ministry of Finance, the RBI. We talked about the difference in living in Delhi and living in Mumbai. And after about 10 minutes into this conversation, I asked Dr. Manmohan Singh, sir, you were Governor of the Reserve Bank of India yourself. Dr. Manmohan Singh was Governor of the Reserve Bank of India in the early 80s. Many people don't remember that because he was more important things later in life. but he also was governor of RBI. So I said, sir, you were governor yourself. Do you have any advice to give me? Well, Manmohan Singh is a very humble person. So he said, Subbarao, what advice do I give you? You were in the IAS, you've seen the country, you've worked at the state level, you've been finance secretary. You know the Reserve Bank, you're familiar with it. Go and do what you think is best for the economy. I'm sure you'll do very well. So that was a very very generalist sort of advice or whatever. And then after another 3-4 minutes, I got up to take leave of him. I got up and then, very gracious person he was, he got up himself, he walked around the table to escort me to the door. And when I half opened the door, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Subbarao, you asked for my advice. I want to give you one bit of advice, which is that, you worked in the government for 35 years, but the Reserve Bank of India is a different animal altogether. He didn't say animal, but a different world, a different institution. And once you go there, you risk losing touch with reality. Because all you hear is interest rate, inflation rate, exchange rate, money supply, credit growth, that you tend to forget that there are people behind that. He gave her advice, then I left his office. Within 1 minute of that, Suchitra, I forgot that advice. I was so busy with all the things that I had to do in moving from Delhi to Mumbai, that advice just slipped out of my mind. But when I went into the Reserve Bank and started working there, and in the first 6 months, I realized the import of the Prime Minister's advice. Because I also want you to understand, you all see in the newspapers that the Reserve Bank does policy review every 2 months, etc. You see that at policy meetings. In the lead up to that policy meeting, the Reserve Bank of India, the governor and deputy governor, the senior management of the RBI consults stakeholders. We consult banks, non-bank finance companies, financial markets, economists, academics, NGOs, farmers, etc. But we don't consult the most important constituency. The most important constituency for RBI's main mandate, inflation, is the large majority of people who are hurt by inflation, right? Because inflation, as they say in textbook economics, is a regressive tax. It hurts poor people more than it hurts well-off people. To give you an example, if the shirt, let's say I bought it for 2,000 rupees, next month if it costs 2,100 rupees, I may not even notice it at my level of income. But poor people notice. If the bus ticket goes up from 20 to 22 rupees, if the price of rice goes up from 40 to 42 rupees, poor people notice. Inflation matters to them. And we don't consult. And I think the real import of Dr. Manmohan Singh's advice was really that. Remember all the poor people, millions of poor people in whatever decision we make.
And while you were at the RBI, you did some amount of kind of demystifying of the RBI, right? Going around the country, talking to people. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
For 1 year in the RBI, my first year in the RBI, just to give you a preface to that answer, first 1 year in the RBI, I was struggling with the global financial crisis. I had no time to think or do anything. I mean, I was carried away by the events. Rather than setting an agenda for myself, after all, many of you have been in leadership positions, you set an agenda. I mean, one of the attributes of a leader is to be able to set the agenda and drive it. I really had no time or the latitude for that. I was just carried away by that. After about 1 year, when I had time to breathe, I was in London, and in India, journalists ask me the same question, when will you cut interest rates and all that. Okay. But in London, one journalist asked me, Governor, you've been in office for 1 year, you've got another 2 years, I was appointed for 3 years at that. What is the agenda you set for yourself? Something impulsively, I said, I want to demystify the Reserve Bank. Something that came out of my heart and my mind. And then when I slept that night, I said, why did I say this? Why did I want to demystify the Reserve Bank? And I realized that the Reserve Bank does a number of things. They matter to people's everyday lives. Just now I talked about inflation, growth, exchange rate, bank regulation, How safe is your money? In fact, if you want to send your daughter to America for education, how much money will the bank give you? How many dollars can you take out? If you want to go for medical treatment to UK, how much money can you take out? All these things are determined by what RBI does. And most people don't connect their everyday life with what RBI does. So the reason I wanted to demystify the Reserve Bank was to explain what the RBI does, how it connects to people's everyday lives, both so that they understand, but also so that they hold the RBI to account.
One of the things when you read a book that goes from the 1970s to the 2020s is
shows how old I am.
Yes.
A senior.
But it also shows various patterns that show up in our economy from time to time. One is inflation, which you addressed so beautifully. But the other one is the rupee exchange rate. So in the late 80s, as a director in DEA in charge of Forex, you saw the early signs of trouble. Then in 2008, 2 days after you became RBI, the governor, the global financial crisis unfolded. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. And then in November, when Dr. Subbarao and his team are working in the RBI offices, you're looking through the windows at the black smoke of the terrorist attack in Bombay in November. And then again, jump forward to 2013, your last year, and there you have the taper tantrums again unfolding. So could you talk us through some of that, and how does it affect people? How do you make decisions in those crisis modes?
I won't tell you about how I make decisions because I'm not a teacher. I cannot tell you that. I'll tell you some stories. Thank you for asking that question. As I told you, one of the things that the Reserve Bank does is manage the exchange rate. Not to target an exchange rate, not to see that it stays at 86 to a dollar or goes up or goes down, to manage the exchange rate smooth movement. And that's an incredibly tough challenge, much more than inflation management. In fact, a lot of people ask me, "Sir, what was your toughest challenge in the RBI?" Half expecting me to say that inflation management was my biggest challenge because inflation is the core mandate of the RBI. But inflation management is tough. I don't want to belittle the challenge, but inflation doesn't work from moment to moment. It goes up slowly. You have time to consult people, study analysis, consult your staff, consult your senior management, sleep over your decision and make a decision. Whereas exchange rate, on the other hand, is something that you've got to decide on the go, as it were, because you're seeing on the screen the rupee falling and you've got to do something. So you've got to give instructions to your staff, decide the strategy, decide the tactics. So it's an incredibly more difficult challenge because both managing inflation and managing exchange rate are managing expectations. Managing expectations is one of the important things. Like, I'll give you an example. If I tell you petrol bunks in Hyderabad are going to get dry by 9 p.m. this evening, right? What will happen? Petrol bunks in Hyderabad will get dry by 9 p.m. this evening, absolutely sure. Why? Because the first thing you'll all do is go and fill up. So it's self-fulfilling expectation. If you expect inflation to go up, it will go up. If you expect exchange rate to drop, it will drop. A difficult challenge. But I'll tell you a story now. During the 2013 taper tantrums, to manage or bring stability to the exchange rate, we did a number of things that central banks normally do, which is capital controls, selling foreign exchange. I won't go into details of all that, but we did that for 2-3 months. But the rupee was still bleeding. And then I did an extraordinary thing. I raised the interest rate by 1%. Now, I don't want to go into economics, but central banks do not normally use the interest rate as an exchange rate management tool. But not only did I do that, but we went to rooftop shouting that we raised interest rate today to manage the volatility in exchange rate. If you throw your mind back to that time in 2012, 2013, that was the time with policy paralysis, growth was going down, etc., etc. So in the TV shows that night and the newspapers the following morning, there was a lot of debate about the RBI raised interest rate, how will it affect growth, etc. There was a media conference at 11 o'clock. And I knew the first question they would ask me is this: Governor, you raised interest rate by 1 percentage point yesterday, will it not hurt growth? Sure enough, I walked into the media room, the first question was about that. Like a student who got an expected question in the exam, I raised it because I knew the answer. I said it out. I said, we raised interest rate because the rupee is volatile. That is our priority now. We are conscious and are sensitive to growth concerns. We no intention of maintaining high interest rate. We'll bring it down as soon as possible, etc. Right? I said the right thing. I said exactly what was in the statement. I said exactly what editors and commentators like Rajiv Sardesai had said. Completely wrong. Within 5 minutes, the market reaction to what I said was brutal and unforgiving. Within 5 minutes, the rupee fell by 5%. Women got anxious. I'm frantic. What did I do wrong? But I said exactly what everybody had said. So I had it with my senior management. And they said, sir, you said the right thing, but it's the way you said it that mattered. You were too apologetic. Saying, I'm sorry I did this, I didn't have to do it, but please excuse me, I'm doing it for the sake of the rupee. And you should have been more assertive. Your shoulders were drooping, your face was ashen. And then, the next morning, one editor wrote an editorial that Subbarao is not an alpha male. Alpha male? I Googled, what is an alpha male? Is it a badge of honor or is it something to be ashamed of? Even today I don't know, but that's the story.
So the decisions that a country makes really shapes the future that it holds. Many of today's young audience may not even have been born at the time of liberalization. But everyone who comes to HLF, we've come in a variety of cars, or you've flown in a variety of planes to get here. Anytime you go shopping, there's a variety of clothes and food. And while inequality is very much present, poverty is very much present, none of this choice that we have would have been there if it were not for the 1991 reforms. You write really vividly about that time and how by 1990 or so RBI was managing forex liquidity on a day-to-day basis. And just the thought of that takes my breath away. So can you tell us what that was, the vital reforms, how it was done?
Sure, thank you. As you mentioned in the intro, Suchitra, I also worked in the Ministry of Finance as a mid-level official in the early 90s. When the Blitzkrieg 1991 reforms under Dr. Manmohan Singh were launched, I was privileged to be in the Ministry of Finance. I was not part of the core reform team, but I was there in the periphery of the reforms. And it was a very difficult time because we were scraping the bottom of the barrel. Foreign exchange reserves had bottomed out. We had no money to repay our loans. We were worried about defaulting on the loan. And actually, we used to borrow in New York and repay in Tokyo, and borrow in Tokyo and repay in New York. We were playing the clock, borrow overnight, etc. We needed to get IMF assistance. But IMF assistance was not forthcoming because we had a caretaker government, Chandrasekhar government, and the IMF was in negotiations with the government, but was not willing to commit assistance until the elections were over. Meanwhile, we had to go by, and one of my responsibilities, I was in charge of getting the Japanese assistance at that time, one of my responsibilities was actually to arrange a bridge loan from Japan until the IMF assistance came. And then, of course, the P.V. Narasimha Rao government had come, Dr. Manmohan Singh had come as finance minister, and Blitzkrieg reforms. But just to give you a flavor of the 1991 reforms, you're also young, not old enough to know 1991. But just some of the old people here might understand, if they're as old as me. Before 1991, it was a different world. We had a choice of 3 pans of soap and 2 pans of toothpaste. If we went abroad, we got just $20 of foreign exchange. If we wanted a telephone connection, or an LPG cylinder, we had to wait for years. If you went abroad, if you go to Singapore or London, your relatives give you a list. Oh, get me a tape recorder, get me a calculator. People were smuggling low-end products. And the government, most of all, was making bread, taking bread and selling it. That was the world before 1991, and the world has changed after that.
And now, jumping forward to 2025, I noticed you gave an interview yesterday talking about very clearly the current government taking structural reforms that are needed. So, can you just briefly touch on what you think are the changes that India really needs at this point?
We'll go into a big class. One of the things people ask me is, do you follow the economy? I say, I don't have to do it for a living anymore. So I don't follow the economy. So when people ask me as if I'm still an expert, I get a bit nervous because they think whatever I'm saying is true. I'm as out of the system as most people here are. But since you asked me, budget is just less than a week away. A lot of these media people call me and say, so what should the finance minister do? So I pontificate just out of my head. So because these days, as governor RBI, I have to be careful about what I said. Because, extremely careful. But now I just wax along with it. So one of the things I say, the government must implement structural reforms. And that's very important. And what structural reforms all of us know. Labor reforms, land reforms, taxation reform, investment reforms, most importantly, governance reforms. Our chief ministers went to Davos yesterday, 3 chief ministers were there, central ministers were there. We hear the news that Davos, they go 50,000 crore, 100,000 crore investment, and those investors come here, and are we putting in enough effort to make investment in India a happy experience for them, a rewarding experience for them? So that's the point. Governance reform, those reforms are important. But one thing I said in the context of the budget, we just had Rajdeep Sardesai's session, which is that this government, this is the third NDA 3 government, has come into office. They've just been in office for 6 months. They got 4.5 years ahead of them. And they got enormous political capital. I believe this is the time for the government to implement politically difficult reforms. As one former EU commissioner said, we all know what to do, we don't know how to get re-elected after that. So, but this government, 4.5 years they must invest. Prime Minister Modi has such political capital that no recent Prime Ministers had. And he must invest some of that to do politically difficult things such as governance reforms and structural reforms.
Now, there might be a lot of youngsters here who are perhaps IAS aspirants, right?
So, some of them actually.
Oh, okay, great. Well then. So you write about how your UPSC interview started off disastrously, but then how the quality improved after that, and the really wide canvas of questions. It had everything from comparing 2 IITs, Kharagpur, Kanpur, Nixon, right, China visit, Indira Gandhi's style of functioning, all over. So could you talk about that disaster turning to success?
Yeah, this is my IAS interview more than 50 years ago, but I like to tell this story more as a leadership lesson. I was still studying in IIT Kanpur when I was called for the UPSC interview back in 1972. My interview was in the last week of February in Delhi, in UPSC. So I took an overnight train from Kanpur to Delhi. I arrived in Delhi at about 5 o'clock in the morning. I went to my friend's place, had showered, changed, pressed my new suit, wore it. My friend's mother gave me breakfast very lovingly. I was ready. My interview was first slot in the morning, 9 o'clock. Delhi, 50 years ago, even late February, it used to be dark and rainy. So by 8 a.m. when I was ready, it's still dark and damp and foggy outside. And my father, who was here, he kept writing me letters saying that, you take a taxi today, because he was anxious that I must go to UPSC in good shape and all that. I always traveled in Delhi in a bus, but okay, out of deference to him, I took a taxi. Here I was, for the first time in my life, wearing a suit. For the first time in my life, sitting in a taxi, going to UPSC. I arrived there in good time, 8:45. They checked my papers. They said, okay, wait. By about 9:05, I was in front of the UPSC board. And the chairman asked me, are you still at IIT Kanpur? Yes, sir. When did you come? I came this morning, sir, by an overnight train. When do you finish at IIT? 2 more months, sir. Okay. Then he turned to one of the members, and the member said, Subbarao, do you read newspapers? I said, yes, sir. Which newspaper? The Statesman, sir. So he said, okay, tell me what is the headline in today's Statesman? I was flustered. I had not seen the newspaper that morning. And, and then the chairman came to my rescue and said, look, it's still dark, Brady. He was preparing for this interview, was coming, he must have been anxious. Did you see this morning's newspaper? So the member smiled and said, okay, tell me, did you see yesterday's newspaper? Yes, sir. What is the front page picture in yesterday's Statesman? These days, if I see a newspaper, I forget in 15 seconds what I saw. But those days I remembered. So I said, sir, it is a picture of Muslims celebrating Muharram. Celebrating? Is Muharram a festival to celebrate? Flustered for a second time in 1 minute. I was nervous. Then he explained to me that Muharram is not a festival. Muharram is an occasion for mourning. It is an occasion to mourn the martyrdom of the Prophet's grandson. Then he said, you've been studying in Kanpur. Kanpur has a predominant Muslim population. How come you don't know? At any other time, I would have been defensive, saying, sir, the IIT campus is very far away. We don't get to interact with the people. Thank God I was so tongue-tied at that moment that I just kept quiet. And that must have worked in my favor. Then he said, which sect of Muslims observes Muharram? And the chairman said, he doesn't even know what Muharram is. Why do you ask him this? So in the first 2 minutes, that interview by which I said so much stored the salt in front of me. And I said, okay, they will go through some motions of interviewing me, waste of time with this guy. In 10, 12 minutes, they'll send me away. But the interview lasted for about 35 minutes. I went on to score the second highest marks in the interview that time. And as you said, Suchitra covered a very wide campus. I had 2 IITs, comparison of the 2 IITs, farming, comparison of farming in Andhra Pradesh versus farming in Punjab, Nixon's China visit, Mrs. Gandhi's style of functioning as Prime Minister, and including Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, whatever. The interview went. And the lesson I learned, I mean, the interview was okay, but the lesson I learned from that, because that was your question, is that setbacks are common. And don't be flustered or pushed back by any setbacks. Because life and career are long hauls, and play for the long haul. That's the lesson I learned.
I think another part from your early IAS days that people would be interested in hearing is, not kind of rashly going into trying to solve injustice, right? And so I don't have to say anymore. Can you tell the story?
What Suchitra is saying is that I was brash and arrogant at one point of time. Indeed, I was. Okay. My first posting was as sub-collector of Parvatipuram in North Coastal Andhra Pradesh in Srikakulam district. That time Srikakulam, now it's a separate district by itself. And I was there in 1975. And you throw your mind back to 1975. The Naxalite movement that we hear about even today, the Naxalite movement originated in Naxalbari, near Darjeeling in West Bengal. It hopped over Odisha and came to Srikakulam district. And the tribal belts of Srikakulam district were ravaged by Naxalite movement for about 4 to 5 years before I went there. By the time I went there, the Naxalite movement had nearly died. We were in the reconstruction mode. And lots of things the government was trying to do, more out of a reaction to what happened, reconstruction program for tribals, etc. But that's not the story I want to say. The story I want to say is whenever I went into the agency areas, as they were called, in tribal villages, I found that tribals had lost their land. They were indebted. Some of them were bonded labor. And I said, okay, why is this the case? I mean, they were in fact vulnerable to extremist movement because they had been historically exploited. And I looked back, I said, theoretically they should not have been exploited at all, because on the statute books, there is what is called protecting legislation for tribal. It is not done by an Indian government, it is done by the British. From 1848, colonial government had done protecting legislation for tribals. It is extraordinary for its clarity of purpose, simplicity of procedure. What does it say? It says that any transfer of land from a non-tribal to a tribal is null and void. Any transfer. It says any loan from a non-tribal to a tribal is null and void. Very simple. All that a tribal had to say is that, look sir, I borrowed 500 rupees from this guy, please write off the loan. Have you borrowed that? You're not denying that you borrowed, you're saying I borrowed this from the Shauka, 500 rupees loan, can you please write off? The sub-collector can sign off and say, your loan is written off. That non-tribal took away my land, I can say, I'm restoring the land to you. Okay, it's so simple. When such protective legislation is on the book, how come tribals have been historically exploited? So here the young and brash Subbarao comes into play. In the first 6 months of my sub-collectorship, I went into every tribal village, as many as I can, evangelizing to tribals, saying that this legislation is on the books, you come and petition to me and I will protect you, I will save you. In fact, I said, I'll put my staff here to write your petitions, so you just do it. And I expected to be flooded with petitions, Nothing happened. Just about half a dozen petitions. Much to my surprise, I said, why is this? And then, slowly I realized, not an epiphany, it's not like a penny dropped. I slowly realized that the reason no tribal is willing to petition the sub-collector is because the non-tribal is his lifeline. Tomorrow, if his daughter falls ill at 2 o'clock in the morning and he's got to take her to a hospital or to a doctor, the non-tribal has to give him a loan. If he's got to perform a marriage, perform a funeral, somebody in the family is ill, whatever, the non-tribals are his lifeline. So here is a big sub-collector saying, I'll write off your loan. One tribal betraying a non-tribal will ostracize the entire village, will get ostracized. That's the reason they didn't come. And the lesson I learned is, again, what Dr. Manmohan Singh told me, keep your ear close to the ground. Don't head into things without thinking, with brash arrogance. Think through what you're going to do.
Thank you. And in keeping things close to the ground, let's hear from people who are sitting closer to the ground. We'll do maybe 3 or 4 questions. The young man in the pink shirt, and then we'll try at the back 2 people.
Hello so much, sir.
One request to keep it really crisp and short, please, so we have more opportunity.
Sure. I was one of the aspirants that I've met, sir, just a few minutes ago. So if we actually type, the first rankers of civil services, the list actually starts from 1972, and the first name pops up is of sirs. So he is a huge source of inspiration and always has been. So just want to ask one thing. So we have worked with many politicians, right? Even from very prudent finance ministers of combined Andhra like Rosaya, to all the way to Manmohan Singh. So sir, I wanted to ask, who is the most challenging politician that you have worked with, who was very difficult to convince? And apart from the 1 year of your tenure during the Lim Brothers crisis, what is your other most challenging posting in your life which made you nervous every day? If not every day, most of the time, that has kept you on your toes. So the most challenging posting and the most challenging politician to work with from across your career. Thank you, sir.
Those are difficult questions, because I work with a variety of politicians, right from the mandal level, from Gram Panchayat presidents, right up to the Prime Minister, and I had learned enormously from them. In fact, one of the things I tell young IAS officers is that you try and understand politicians. You know, any IAS officer thinks that his story is, I passed an exam, I've come here to reform the world, I'm here to do great things, the politicians are stopping me. Don't believe that story. Politicians are not all even. Okay? So, I've had the opportunity of working with many prime ministers, many politicians at different levels, different parties, different inclinations, different personalities. And I've learned from all of them, and dealing with any politician is a challenge. So that's the answer. And one of challenging assignments, every assignment in real time is a challenge. Only in hindsight, you evaluate the challenges. I talked about many of them. I talked about the governor, which you mentioned. I talked about OSDOs, Alec bottling. I talked about my sub-collector. All of them are challenging. Yes.
Can we get at the back, the gentleman with the young girl with the blue? Yeah.
Again, the never-ending debate of specialist and generalist recruitment in IAS. So, what are your thoughts on it, and what do you feel the most democratic way process of recruitment? And also, so there is an increasing demand of innovation in government. So, how can an IAS officer can adapt and allow the cross-fertilization of specialists and generalists for forward-thinking policies?
Thank you. Thank you, the girl in the blue, for asking that intelligent question. I have, it's an important question. And it's difficult to capture the response in a couple of minutes. There are very few countries in the world today which have a generalist civil service. In fact, the generalist civil service, the ICS, was given to us by the British colonial regime. The British themselves have done away with the generalist civil service, but it continues here. My own view is that we need a combination of generalists and specialists. We need generalists to acquire specialist knowledge. We need specialists to acquire some generalist administrative knowledge. We've seen some extraordinary administrators coming from the specialist stream, such as Montek Singh Ahluwalia, even Dr. Manmohan Singh himself. We've had the chairman of Space Commission, etc. Extraordinary people. Specialists can make good administrators. Generalist administrators are by definition are not bad. So we need both of them. I think the challenge for the government is to ensure that they are benefited or advised by a combination of generalists and specialists. But if you want a more nuanced response, we can talk later.
Thank you, and compliments on your book. And Dr. Subbarao, do you think demonetization had any impact in the economy of neighboring countries?
I'm not sure, because it's possible. We hear stories about money, Indian rupees going outside. See, one thing is, Indian rupee is not convertible. It's not like a dollar or the euro, okay? So people who take the rupees out are doing it not for legitimate purposes, right? So if money is found in neighboring countries, it is prima facie questionable. And I'm sure that our intelligence agencies, our enforcement agencies must be looking into it. But I have no inner knowledge except to say that in the Reserve Bank of India, one of our responsibilities was actually to identify fake currency, etc. Currency, of course, circulates all over the country, but the incidence of fake currency was higher in bordering districts, in Punjab, in Bengal, in Rajasthan, etc. So that much is true.
Let's have a question from here. Person in the green shirt. Here in front. Yeah.
Subbarao, first and foremost, excellent sense of humor. During the entire conversation, we really enjoyed. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. Though you were not part of the ICS, rather you were IAS, still, what do you think were the positive aspects under British governance, if any, according to you?
Thank you. Thank God Suchitra is not here. I personally think, no, the British colonial rule was not all bad. Part good, part bad. I'm not a historian to make an evaluation of that, but with specific narrow reference to the ICS. If you compare the ICS of those days and the IAS of today, the IAS is a multifarious responsibility. The ICS district officers had just two things to do: collect taxes, enforce law and order. Those are the only two things an ICS collector had to do. If you ask a collector today, what is your main responsibility? If you ask her, list out 10 of your responsibilities, very unlikely that in the 10 things that she has to do as the district collector, maintaining law and order or collecting taxes will come in the first list of things, okay? So administration's changed, a lot of things have changed, but I believe the ICS has left some traditions, especially at the field level administration. Just to give you an example, when I went to Parvatipuram or later to Ongole district where I was collector, you want to know about the district, right? What rivers, what crops, where do people live, how do people live, what their incomes and all that. There is no book, even today, if you go to a district and say you're collector of Mahbub Nagar district, you want to go to Mahbub Nagar as collector and say, is there any single book that can tell me about Mahbub Nagar district? You'll come out in an assortment of books, but not one single book that is catering to the requirement of a district administrator, and the ICS has done that. The district gazetteers. The second thing they've done is permanent settlement. For permanent settlement of land. Every inch of land has been surveyed and settled. And that's an enormous contribution to land administration at that time, to general administration even today.
Thank you. Woman at the back, and you're the last question, and then I have one small question, and then we wrap up.
It was great listening to you, sir. I had a question on liberalization. While it was necessary at that time, given the forex situation then, in hindsight, do you think it was a right thing for especially the state we are in now, where there are too many choices and people are just a little indifferent about how they are choosing? And what can we do now to probably reverse some of those things?
I don't know whether you asked that as a philosophical question or a value-loaded question, or whether we were to reverse the reforms. But let me try and address it the way I understood the question. The 1991 reforms, I said the world has changed. You people don't know, your parents probably can tell you about that. But, a lot of people think, in fact, this is what I wrote in my obituary to Dr. Manmohan Singh, which is that a lot of people think that we've done all that because the IMF dictated that to us. That is not true. The IMF would have said, okay, devalue the exchange rate, cut budget spending, but that's about all. We did much, much more, right? We liberalized imports, dismantled the license permit regime. We opened up the financial sector. We stopped the Reserve Bank from being the cashier of the government. We did a number of things going beyond what the IMF required, because we believed that if India had to keep up with the world, we had to do those things. In fact, even then people were writing that we missed the bus. So we had to get on the bus, and I believe that the 1991 reforms were necessary. Good choices, I used to talk about that as well, it's come to India, but when we went to the US, when you go to McDonald's, any place, you got to It's mind-boggling choice, right? If you buy this and that, it costs so much. If you buy this minus this, it costs so much. Today you have to make those choices even in India. And mind-boggling. But cutting through those choices is your choice. Not somebody else who could tell you. You can cut through those choices. You can say that I will eat sabji and dal every day. That's it. You made a choice. So to believe, see, one of the things is to believe that the choices are being forced on you. Nobody is forcing them on you. You can eschew choices from your life and live a life without choices. That's possible.
Thank you. And the last question, I'm sure all of us here in the audience practiced our signatures when we were children. What is it like to have your signature on your country's currency?
It was wonderful. But you know, again, I want to tell you a story. When I was governor, I used to travel around the country, and if I saw a school, government school on the roadside, I was very fond of stopping there and walking into the school. And here, you know, two cars, governor followed by a staff car, two cars, and shooted and booted people, you know, 3-4 people walk into an elementary school in far-flung village in the country. The teachers are frustrated, you know, who are these people coming? And then within 2-3 minutes, they realized that this guy who has come is the governor. And then you enter the classroom. It's very easy for the governor, for the teacher to introduce the governor. See, Prime Minister Modi went to a classroom by surprise, and if a teacher has to describe what the Prime Minister does, it's very incredibly difficult to describe. Well, how do you define what the Prime Minister does? He does so many things. When it comes to government, you know, she tells the children, this is the guy who signs in a currency. And children's eyes light up, okay? This guy, the one who signs on the currency. So it's magical. Thank you.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you so much, Dr. Subbarao. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Subbarao. On behalf of all of us here and on behalf of my entire HLF team, thank you very much for coming to HLF, and thank you, Suchitra, for doing this wonderful session.